Well, the first night of the second Democratic Party primary debate is officially over, and basically, it lived up to my expectations. What I wanted going into this was for Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren to really team up and take on all of the centrists. They did that, and I think that you're going to see they were victorious overall because the centrists, even though they were all dogpiling on Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, which is what I expected them to do since they are the two frontrunners in this race, it was clear who shined. It was clear who got the most applause. It was Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. So I'm going to get into, some general takeaways from the debate. First of all, I just want to start with some numbers so we kind of get a sense as to what the public feels about the debaters, as well as how much time they had to speak. So when it comes to the number of Twitter followers gained, Marianne Williamson obtained the most during the debate with 8,000. Elizabeth Warren came in second with almost 6,000. Pete Buttigieg in third with nearly 5,000. Bernie with over 2,000. John Delaney with over 1,000. Bullock with 1,000. Amy Klobuchar with 782, Beto O'Rourke with 718, John Hickenlooper with 407, and Tim Ryan gaining the least amount of Twitter followers with 372. Now, when it comes to Google searches, it looks like Marianne Williamson is the one that was the most searched throughout the country, with Steve Bullock coming in second place, being the most searched name in his home state of Montana. Now, when it comes to who spoke the most, Elizabeth Warren came out on top with 18 minutes, Bernie with 17 minutes, Pete Buttigieg in third with 14 minutes, Bullock, Klobuchar, and O'Rourke all had 10 minutes, 44 seconds spoken exactly, which is a little bit weird. John Delaney had 10 minutes, 24 seconds spoken, Tim Ryan, 9:38, Marianne Williamson, 8:53, and John Hickenlooper, 8 minutes and 37 seconds. So that's some numbers, but I want to start to get into a little bit of the general takeaways that I had, as well as some specifics, and then I'll have some additional videos planned where I get into highlight moments that I thought were just great. But first of all, for someone like John Delaney, it really felt like, and I don't know if this is just because I hate him so much, he spoke so much. Like, if you're polling at 1%, to have a disproportionate amount of time to speak, that's even comparable to someone like Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg, I think that's an issue. And it wasn't just that he was butting in a lot like he did last time, because I don't think he did that as much, but CNN called on him, it felt like, repeatedly. And that's really irritating because, again, he has no support. He was booed by Democrats at the California Democratic Party convention. He isn't very popular. But the reason why they were kind of using him as the antagonist against Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren is because he's probably the furthest to the right and spoke out against them the most. Like, he started off the debate by criticizing Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and they kind of based the first question with regard to healthcare around John Delaney's criticism. So he's kind of, in a way, being propped up by CNN simply so that way, there's this dynamic where it's someone versus the progressives. But I think that that's unfair to the other centrists. Not that I care too much about them, but I mean, if you're Amy Klobuchar, I'm thinking, what gives? Why is he getting more time than me? Why is he getting called on more than me when I'm polling ahead of him? Now, she may be polling at, 2-3%. Still, I mean, the fact that he's getting more airtime, I think that's a failure on CNN's part. And it was clear, that CNN did have a bias. When you go to this tweet by Vic Berger, look at the framing on some of these headlines. When they were live tweeting this debate, well, you can see that, they frame it as Delaney goes after Sanders and Warren. Not that, they sparred. They try to make it seem as if John Delaney was the winner here. And even though centrists on Twitter, like Jennifer Rubin of the Washington Post, will say that Delaney was the winner and came out on top, he absolutely did not. And this debate is not going to help him at all. So let's get into the winners and the losers, which is probably my favorite part. Now, as I usually do, I have four main categories. I have the winners, I have the people who performed well, the good category, if you will, and then I have the meh category, people who kind of just maintained, and then I have the losers. I have a lot of losers this time. So the biggest loser, without question, is John Delaney. And it's not just that I ideologically disagree with John Delaney the most based on what he was talking about, but he obviously was struggling to defend his vision for the party when it came to healthcare. He couldn't talk about it without using Republican Party talking points. He literally espoused numerous lies about Medicare for All. For example, he claimed that Medicare for All would cause hospitals to go out of business. This is factually incorrect. Even PolitiFact rated that statement false. So he's coming up with these myths about Medicare for All, and you would think that because he's willing to lie, that should help him, right? As long as you say it confidently, you're going to come out on top of this debate. But even with his lies, it was clear that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren dominated. So he just was someone who was propped up by CNN, so that way, they can have this dynamic, Bernie versus the centrists, and he didn't come out on top. And he literally took a moment to declare his support for TPP. He bragged about that. He said, "I'm the only candidate on the stage who supports the TPP." John, it's 2019. That's part of the reason why Hillary Clinton lost, because Trump was against it, and she claimed that she was against it, but voters didn't believe her, particularly voters in the Rust Belt, where she lost. Do you honestly believe that's going to get you any momentum? I mean, I don't know what he's doing. So without question, John Delaney, biggest loser. Other individuals I would put in the loser category are definitely the centrists. John Hickenlooper, Tim Ryan, and Steve Bullock. It's really sad that Mike Gravel was excluded from the debate, but instead we got all of these centrists. Why did we need Steve Bullock and John Hickenlooper and John Delaney all on the debate stage? Nothing that they said was unique. They were just parroting each other's centrist and right-wing talking points about progressive policy proposals. John Hickenlooper has the charisma of a fucking turtle. He talked in a way that made it seem like he had peanut butter on the roof of his mouth. And peanut butter, under his tongue, like maybe his mouth was dry, but the guy has no charisma. If he goes up against Donald Trump, he is getting curb stomped. Not even going to be close. So John Hickenlooper, I don't know why he hasn't dropped out. Steve Bullock, I don't know why he was included in this debate. Nothing he said was great. There was an exchange between him and Elizabeth Warren when it came to nuclear, non-proliferation, and he was arguing with Warren about first strike. Warren made the case that, look, we should commit publicly that we will never be a first strike country. We will never be the first country to drop a nuclear bomb. We'd only consider using them in response to another country using them on us first. And she explained this phenomenally and clearly, and he just couldn't get it through his thick skull. And he even kind of conceded at some point, look, I kind of see what you're saying, but then he wouldn't back down because he was clearly working backwards from his conclusion. It wasn't a good look. Hopefully this will be the last that we see of him. Tim Ryan, again, what was the purpose of Tim Ryan being at this debate? He got crushed by Tulsi Gabbard last time, and he clearly didn't learn his lesson because when it came to the foreign policy portion, he was criticizing Donald Trump and getting into kind of this exchange with Amy Klobuchar because he said we shouldn't speak with, Kim Jong-un. In other words, he's saying if I'm president, I will be against diplomacy. I'm not going to talk to dictators. Now, you may be philosophically opposed to dictators. I am as well. But as president, you don't have a choice. That's your job. You are the chief diplomat. So what are you expecting to do? Not pick up the phone if a dictator calls? I've got bad news for you. There's a lot of dictatorships in the world. Most countries are not democratic, for the most part. So the fact that he has this view, it's not just naive, but it's dim-witted. We expect you to do diplomacy. But he's basically saying, I wouldn't talk to anyone, and if I need to, I would escalate. That's really the sense that I got from him, and it was embarrassing. He should have dropped out after Tulsi Gabbard destroyed him last time. The fact that he didn't learn his lesson, it's embarrassing. Okay, so moving on to the meh category, Beto O'Rourke made it into this category. It's a step up from last time because I believe last time I placed him in the loser category. And it was because everybody was just tag teaming, just beating up on Beto. This time that wasn't the case. but he still did not shine. And what was embarrassing was that he kept trying to make the case that, look, there's a new battleground state in play. It's Texas. The problem is that you can't make this case because you just lost to Ted Cruz. Had you defeated Ted Cruz, you would be able to make this argument. But because you have lost to him, the fact that you're making this is a little bit embarrassing. Now, he didn't hurt his campaign any further, but he didn't do enough, I think, to have the momentum to propel him further along. Maybe he'll make it to Iowa, but at this point, I just don't know how he's going to be able to, withstand other candidates surging. Like, why go for O'Rourke when Buttigieg is surging and has money? Why go for him? There's other options if you want a milquetoast centrist who is, kind of this Obama light individual. It's Buttigieg. It's Klobuchar even. So I just don't know why he's still in the race either. But nonetheless, he didn't perform terribly, didn't do enough to help himself. Also, in the meh category, I'm going to put Amy Klobuchar here. Amy Klobuchar is in the meh category because for most of this debate, I forgot that she was participating. Like, I know that she's really trying to set herself apart as kind of the pragmatic centrist. She's like John Delaney. She's ideologically and philosophically aligned with him, but she's less belligerent, right? She's less willing to attack Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren head on because she at least knows which way the wind is blowing. She knows how to read a room. So she's a little bit more strategically savvy than someone like John Delaney, who just comes across as a belligerent buffoon. That being said, she still didn't do anything to really move the needle, and there's just no there. Like, she's not presenting herself as someone who can win and defeat Donald Trump. She's just so boring. So it's just like, what have you proposed that's unique? Why should we vote for you over any other centrist in the race? There's tons of centrists. So why should I go for you if I support a centrist, over Joe Biden, over Pete Buttigieg? Why? She's not making that point and making that case for herself. And if she doesn't really start to get some type of spark that ignites, she's going to have to drop out soon. I don't know how she can keep this up. Okay, let's get to the next category. It's the did good category. This is candidates who didn't win, but I think they did a relatively good job. They had a good performance. And I'm going to tell you, Marianne Williamson barely made it into this category. She was almost in the meh category. And it was because at the beginning of this debate, during the healthcare portion, she face planted. She sided with the centrists. She said, usually I'm in the camp of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, but she sided with the centrists, and the reason she gave as to why she is against Medicare for All is because something agent of chaos, something stability. Marianne, that is not persuasive at all. And you speak so intelligently and articulately about race issues and economic issues and corruption and corporate greed. So why on this one issue are you so bad? I don't get it. And for everyone in the Orb gang, it's heartbreaking, right? Because she was steadily rising in my book. And at that moment, that was awful. That was a gut punch. However, towards, the end of the debate, she started to move back up, even though I will not forgive her for Medicare for All. But, she started to move up. As she usually does, she talked beautifully about reparations. I don't think her number is high enough. Nonetheless, she still speaks about this, as a debt that's owed in, I think, a persuasive manner, in terms of talking about corruption and, treating the causes instead of just talking about the symptoms. It's all brilliant. She called out the other candidates for the financial contributions that they are taking from special interests. So she does a good job. And she's picked her lane as someone who is progressive. But this, this healthcare portion, it was a bad look. So Marianne, I don't know why you're choosing to be bad on the issue of healthcare, but you need to educate yourself as you've done with other issues. Because to describe, your unwillingness to support Medicare for All as you not wanting to act as an agent of chaos, I find that downright insulting. Do better here, improve. If you want the support of grassroots activists, most of which who are progressive, which you'll need to get into the third debate, mind you, in September, you need to come around to this issue and do better. Okay, so getting to the winners. Look, this was the best case scenario. Who won? Hands down, Bernie and Elizabeth Warren. Now, one of them edged out. It was really close. I was conflicted as to whether or not I would declare this a tie, but I do think there's a clear winner. And that winner is Bernard Sanders. Bernie Sanders absolutely brought the heat. He did everything I have been begging him to do. I told him to take the gloves off. He took the gloves off. I told him to be more aggressive. He was more aggressive. Not only did he absolutely dominate that discussion on healthcare, but he had a lot of great one-liners that definitely weren't intentional. You could tell that he didn't rehearse them because he was just responding in an off-the-cuff way to other candidates who were criticizing him. He, had a lot of funny moments.
I wrote the damn bill.
And he also brought the substance. Bernie Sanders was phenomenal. Now, with that being said, the reason why, I was questioning who I'd place as number one, if I would place him as number one or just declare it a tie, was because he kind of faded into the background towards the second half, but he still had a great closing performance. But towards the end, Elizabeth Warren was phenomenal. When it came to trade, she did a good job at basically beating Don Delaney into a pulp. So at the beginning, you had Bernie Sanders basically annihilate him when it comes to healthcare, and in the second half, Elizabeth Warren did the same with regard to trade. Now, Elizabeth Warren, she was one of the few Democrats who actually stood up to Barack Obama when he was pushing for the TPP. So she has credibility on this issue. And, in response to John Delaney saying that her stance on trade is radical, she said, what is radical about bringing workers and unions to the table to negotiate these free trade agreements? You can't dispute that point. You're at a Democratic Party debate. You can't dispute that. And really, this shows that as an educator, she does a great job at communicating, things in a very elementary way that are easily digestible. And this was great. I mean, both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, I said they needed to team up. They both teamed up. And this was a great night for progressives. Everything that I saw from them, I loved. Because what they did here was they showed that out of all of these centrists, they shined in spite of everyone dogpiling on them. And they didn't have to lie. They didn't have to obfuscate. They told the truth in spite of CNN's biased framing. Like, for example, Jake Tapper really wanted Elizabeth Warren and Bernie to admit that taxes would increase under their plans, but they held their ground. They said, look, overall, most people will have more money in their pockets if we pass Medicare for All because we are eliminating premiums, copays, and deductibles. That's going to make a huge difference. And speaking to CNN's bias, towards the end, Jake Tapper, on the topic of foreign policy, when that came up, he basically tried to compare Bernie Sanders to Donald Trump, saying, well, look, Donald Trump said he's anti-interventionist and anti-war, so you're saying the same thing. Why should Americans believe you and not Donald Trump? Okay, first of all, who is it that's been leading the charge to end the war in Yemen? It's been Bernie Sanders. Who is it that considered bombing Iran and then changed his mind at the last minute? Donald Trump. So when Bernie Sanders said it's because Trump is a liar, it's as simple as that. And, the fact that Jake Tapper framed it this way really is disgusting, because to compare Bernie Sanders to Donald Trump really shows that you're not willing to dive into the nuance, because these are different positions. Donald Trump doesn't have a coherent policy when it comes to, foreign issues. He just doesn't. He acts instinctively, and basically he will have an opinion that's formed based on who says what on Fox News or what the neocons in his cabinet say. So to compare Bernie and Trump really is egregious. But overall, Bernie and Liz dominated, but Bernie Sanders definitely was the standout here, and that is really good because Bernie needed a win. He was starting to kind of stagnate in the polls, and it's not that he was necessarily slipping per se, but other candidates were catching up because they were surging. Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren. So Bernie needed a victory, and I hope that this will give him some more momentum, propel him forward, in hopes that Joe Biden gets another lose, in the following debate. Hopefully he'll go down, and hopefully we see Bernie go up. Now, getting into some specifics here. One thing that stood out to me was the discussion about guns surrounding the, NRA and the influence of them on Congress. A lot of the candidates were not afraid to call out money in politics and corruption. For example, Beto O'Rourke tied that to Congress's unwillingness to act. So what irritates me, though, is that the candidates, they can talk intelligently about corruption when it comes to one issue where they're clearly not corrupted, because nobody is taking money from the NRA on that debate stage, as far as I know. But when it comes to healthcare, they were just advocating against Medicare for all. They were just taking the side of the health insurance industry. So none of them have credibility here. You can talk a good game all you want, but unless you actually put your words into practice and support the policies that the people want, and not kowtow to special interests, as people like Beto O'Rourke and Pete Buttigieg do, then you just have no credibility. When it came to the issue of electability, Elizabeth Warren made a very powerful point when John Delaney and the other centrists were trying to assert that, if we nominate someone who's a quote-unquote far leftist, well, that just means that Donald Trump is going to win. But what Elizabeth Warren said in response to that was, look, I remember when they said Obama couldn't win. I remember when they said that Donald Trump couldn't win. We shouldn't be worrying about, who can and can't get elected, and then as a result end up nominating someone who we don't believe in. And then Pete Buttigieg actually chimed in with a solid point saying, look, we shouldn't be worrying about what Republicans say. And he also made another point that I thought was great at a different time in the debate, I believe, where he said, look, regardless if we nominate someone who's from the center or the center left or the left, Republicans are going to call you a socialist no matter what. So it doesn't matter. Just promote the policies that you believe in. And that was a great point. I just wish that he wasn't a coward and, stopped promoting all of these neoliberal policies. There was a moment when Pete Buttigieg lied about student loan debt cancellation, and he said something to the effect of, look, why would we cancel everyone's student loan debt, and then college students who are, starting college next year, they're going to accumulate debt. But what he failed to mention was that any candidate who has proposed student loan debt cancellation, they also, in conjunction with student debt cancellation, are promoting free college. So he's being incredibly disingenuous here, and he does not support free college, nor does he support student loan debt cancellation, because Pete Buttigieg is a centrist. So, one thing that is a common theme with all of these centrists is that since they clearly are less inspirational than Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, to a lesser extent, they have to lie about the policies that they promote in order to make themselves look better. But Marianne put it best, I think. She said, I wonder why some of you are running as Democrats. Exactly. There was another point where Elizabeth Warren said, why are we using Republican Party talking points when it comes to issues like healthcare? Exactly. All these centrists did was lie. They gaslighted people. They obfuscated. They couldn't tell the truth about the policies that are overwhelmingly popular among the Democratic Party base. So what they chose to do, what their strategy was collectively, it seemed, was to lie to the Democratic Party base and say these policies that are extremely popular, you actually don't want to support them because they're not in your best interest. And I'm sorry, Democratic Party primary voters, they are more savvy than Republican Party primary voters. So you're not going to be able to lie to them as easily as Trump was able to lie to Republican Party primary voters. That's just the fact. So the fact that they're going out of their way to lie, and the fact that they're not disclosing the conflicts of interest, the financial contributions that they have taken, the fact that John Delaney literally has stake in the healthcare industry, it just shows that they can't win by being honest. So they have to lie. And I think that this came across. People knew that they were being dishonest, which is why I believe they absolutely lost this debate. John Delaney especially. Last thing I want to talk about, Bernie Sanders responding to Pete Buttigieg, because it was clear that CNN wanted to goad Pete Buttigieg into attacking Bernie Sanders for being too old. Pete Buttigieg then said, look, I don't care how old you are, but I care about the ideas and your vision for the country. I think Bernie Sanders had a very persuasive argument. He sold people on the vision that he believes in, student loan debt cancellation, Medicare for all. And it doesn't matter how old you are, and voters certainly don't care how old Bernie Sanders is, and that's proven by the fact that so many millennials and Gen Zers support Bernie Sanders. And, Pete Buttigieg, I don't know off the top of my head where his support comes from, demographically speaking, but I know he's not going to get anywhere near the support that Bernie Sanders has among millennials. So with that being said, that's just my general take. We're going to get into some specifics in videos that will be published after this one. But overall, this was really the best case scenario. It was a clear victory for Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, but especially Bernie Sanders. And I think that what they did was effectively wipe out these centrists. They wiped them out because they showed themselves as the frauds that they are. They made asses of themselves by basically taking the entire time to shit on progressive policies. I mean, John Delaney, he is indistinguishable from a moderate Republican like John Kasich. So why are you on the debate stage? If all you're doing is saying, we can't do this policy, we can't do that policy, why are you there? What ideas do you have?
I don't understand why anybody goes to all the trouble of running for president of the United States just to talk about what we really can't do and shouldn't fight for.
You've talked about vague proposals with regard to healthcare. You've talked about policies that aren't popular like the TPP, but why are you there? And for someone who's polling at 1%, as Ken Klippenstein pointed out on Twitter, for you to talk about what is and isn't realistic is a little bit ironic because your campaign is not realistic. But what's great is that since Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, they did such a good job, I don't think we're going to be hearing much from these centrists. And I say that because I don't know that they're going to be able to qualify for the third debate in September because the requirements are a lot more stringent. I mean, you need 130,000 individual donations. I'm not sure what the polling requirements currently are, but that's a lot. And these guys, some of them haven't even reached the 65,000 donor threshold. And again, it's just extra egregious to me that Mike Gravel met that, but still was excluded. So I don't know that John Delaney, John Hickenlooper will be included in the September debate, but they shouldn't. Because, I mean, look, it's time to start thinning the field. There's more than 20 candidates running, and most people on this stage, half of them, are not serious contenders. There's no movement. There wasn't movement after the first debate, and they utilized the same strategy here. And I predict that we're not going to see much movement from them, if any. And if we do see movement, it's going to be backwards. So the main takeaways are Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren proved why progressivism is stronger, why it makes them more electable. And centrists, they were scrambling, trying to figure out ways to sell their centrism, and they just couldn't do that in a persuasive way. Hence why they had to lie. So look, drop out John Delaney, drop out John Hickenlooper. We don't need to hear from you. It's a no. It's time for the big boys and the big girls to start debating, and for all of these, losers to just drop out already. It's not going to happen. I don't know how they have the money to stay in the race because, you don't have much grassroots support, so you've got to be taking in a lot of money from special interests in order to propel your campaign. But I can't even see why, if you are a rich person, you'd want to donate to these people because they're not going to win. They're not going anywhere. So I just don't see how they can, maintain their campaigns. You've got to pay staff. You've got to pay for headquarters. You've got to pay rent. And they're not picking up any steam yet. So, I mean, by now, they should drop out. And if they don't drop out soon, then I don't know what to say. They're just fooling themselves at this point. But that was my breakdown of the debate. Bernie and Liz shined. Warren and Bernie Sanders really did a great job at promoting progressivism. I think that Pete Buttigieg and Marianne Williamson, they also did a good job, but there was a lot left to be desired between the two of them. And Marianne Williamson, she needs to do better on healthcare because what she's saying, not great. But overall, that was entertaining. That was the Bernie that we need to see in future debates. He was on fire. He brought it. He was aggressive. Bring that to every single debate and interview and town hall going forward because that's what you need to prove to people that you are the fighter, not anyone else.